Hey everybody, Sam Jacobs. Welcome back to the Sales Hacker Podcast and welcome to Friday Fundamentals. I hope it's a beautiful Friday wherever you are. As a reminder, this is the short 5 to 10 minute format where we bring back this week's guest to ask about a pressing question, perhaps that lingered from the interview. And this week, our guest on the show is Allison Wagenfeld. Allison is the Chief Marketing Officer for Google Cloud, representing both Google Cloud Platform and G Suite. And as we discussed earlier this week, she has had roles at a variety of different companies. She's worked at very small companies where she was, I think, the number 2 person at the company. She helped start Quicken Loans at Intuit. So she was a small division within a very, very large organization. She was an investor. So she's seen tons of early stage companies that are scaling to great heights like Zoom. And now she works at Google, which has over 100,000 employees. So our question for Allison is going to be about how do you know whether it's a big company or a small company is right for you, and how do you sort of evaluate that decision when you're thinking about where to join. Now, before we dive in, we want to thank our sponsor. Our sponsor for Friday Fundamentals is Outreach. Outreach triples the productivity of sales teams and empowers them to drive predictable and measurable revenue growth. By prioritizing the right activities and scaling customer engagement with intelligent automation, Outreach makes customer-facing teams more effective and improves visibility into what really drives results. Allison, thanks for being on the show. Our question for you for Friday Fundamentals is, how do you know, and what are the biggest differences between working at a really big company like Google and a small early stage company, and how do you figure out which one is right for you?
Hi, Sam. Well, thanks for having me here. So yes, I have been at the tiniest of tiny companies with no office space all the way to now today, one of over 100,000 at Google. So it's certainly seen the gamut. And I would say that there's pros and cons of each. I mean, so the smaller companies that I've been at, and certainly as an investor at Emergence Capital, investing in small companies, the part that I loved about that is everything happens so quickly. You decide something, you do it, you make it happen. The feedback mechanism is instant, or it feels instant. And it feels like you're constantly making progress and having impact. And that is a really rewarding place to be organizationally. And then certainly when you join small companies, as an executive for sure, but even you have impact on every aspect of the company, of the culture, of the people, of the office space, of the communication mechanisms, that kind of how you choose to have fun, what an offsite looks like. So and often you get to operate outside of your job function. So even though when I came into a startup as the VP of marketing, I felt like I was impacting product strategy. I was impacting kind of how did we want to think about sales. I would be part of the pitches as we were raising money from venture capitalists. So that kind of exposure, there's something really, you just kind of can have like 10 years of experience and packed into 2 or 3 years when everything moves that quickly. The flip side, of course, is that you are building everything from scratch. You have no processes to fall back on. You feel like you are, the person who's in charge of the budget, who's in charge of the systems, who's working through every HR issue that comes off. And being at a company like Google, where I have such tremendous support across all of these different areas, allows me to really focus on what does it mean to be a great marketer here, and how am I generating demand and working with our sales teams and building out the brand and doing all the things that we need to do for marketing. And it's more functionally oriented that way. And often with a big company, particularly one like Google, having the brand to kind of back you up, it means that kind of anybody I call or anybody I want to engage with, I don't spend the beginning of those conversations, who I am, what am I doing, why it matters. And so you end up being able to kind of launch right into having meaningful discussions and partnership opportunities. And so that's been one of the aspects that's been fun at Google. So I think it really depends. I actually think it's great to go back and forth to some degree. And some of our best hires here are people who have been able to operate at scale at a big company and know what it means to work with tens of thousands of people and communicate globally and understand that aspect of it, but have also been able to work in more of an entrepreneurial startup environment, because then that bias to action is really, really strong, and have found that to be an important combo.
So how do you figure out what's right for you if you were to give that advice to young people out there?
So I think depends on where you are in your own career growth. I think that when you're just starting out, I actually think that there's value of being at a bigger company because you learn from people that have been there, done that before, and you see what processes look like, you see what scale looks like, and you're often surrounded by a peer group that you're learning from as well. But then I think it's, after a couple of years, it might be worthwhile to then kind of switch over and go to more of a startup where you're actually helping to build yourself, where you can take some of that learning and then you can put your own flair on it and modify what worked and experiment with new areas. And then hopefully your company is wildly successful. So you either grow into a big company or you get acquired into a bigger company, and then you can bring that real entrepreneurial initiative back into a bigger company. So I think that it's actually important to be able to operate in both capacities. And I think that if you're working at a startup, that you should get to know people who work at bigger companies and understand what that's like. And if it's a B2B startup, you're probably selling into those bigger companies. And if you are working at a bigger company, don't lose track of, go to a SaaStr event or go to events where there are some smaller companies there, because it reminds you of what it means to be agile and nimble and trying to experiment quickly. And sometimes if you're at a big company for too long, I think that you can lose track of some of those elements that makes a company really successful.
Makes a lot of sense. So recapping, and these are broad strokes, but early stage, obviously the benefits are speed of execution, the ability to learn on the fly, the ability to take initiative sometimes. On the other hand, there's not as much infrastructure, there's not as much support, and you don't get the overhead, the air cover that you might get from working at a very large organization. And so some balance between the two over the course of your career probably makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And then always just being really focused about who are the people that you're working with day in, day out. If you go to a startup, that ensuring that you have people to learn from around you. And then even the same as at a bigger company, that, for example, if you're at a startup and have never worked at a bigger company, but want that exposure, if you work for somebody who has at a startup or you have a peer who has, you can learn in that capacity as well. So I think it's being constantly learning and asking questions and recognizing that there's many models of success and really keeping your eyes open to be aware and learn from others.
Makes a lot of sense. Allison, thanks so much for being on the show this week. If folks want to apply, because Google Cloud is growing so quickly and hiring thousands of salespeople, they should find the relevant job that they're interested in. You're hiring all over the world and reach out. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, that sounds accurate.
Perfect. Thanks for being on the show. Thanks to Outreach for putting food on our table, and we'll talk to you next time.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you.